Hello, today I'm going to introduce the book named The Story of the World, written by Susan Wise Bauer. Saladin of Jerusalem. Now Jerusalem was in the hands of the Crusaders. The land all around the holy city was ruled by Crusader princes. But the Saracens wanted Jerusalem back. They organized themselves into an army and attacked one of the little kingdoms near Jerusalem, called Edessa. In 1144, they defeated its Crusader prince and took Edessa. When news of this revolt reached England, France, and the other Christian countries, a new army of knights set out to fight the Saracens. We call this the Second Crusade, but the Second Crusade failed. The Crusader army couldn't retake that rebellious little kingdom. It remained in Muslim hands. The Crusader army fell apart, and the knights crept back home, ashamed of their failure. And the Saracens, under the great warrior Saladin, began to prepare for an even greater attack on Jerusalem itself. When Saladin was born, Jerusalem had been in the hands of the Crusaders for almost 40 years. And Saladin was just as anxious to win the city back for Islam as the Crusaders had been to conquer it for Christianity. From childhood on, he prepared himself to be a warrior. He spent years learning how to follow the Quran and training himself to fight. As a young man, he fought in the army commanded by his uncle. More and more Muslims noticed Saladin and praised his bravery. Finally, Saladin became the second in command over all the Muslims in Egypt. Now he had his own army, and he was determined to bring all the Muslims together into one powerful army with one goal, to retake the city of Jerusalem. But before he could do this, Saladin had to convince the Muslim warriors to follow him, rather than any other Muslim leader. So he was careful to be a model Muslim. He never broke his word. He always prayed 5 times a day, even when he was traveling or fighting. He gave so many things to the poor that his treasury was almost empty. He gained a reputation for justice and fairness. Saladin became more and more popular. At last he had gathered a huge and faithful army around him. In the year 1187, he was ready to march towards Jerusalem. When the Crusader ruler of Jerusalem, King Guy, heard that Saladin's army was approaching, he called all of his knights together to ask them for advice. The oldest and strongest knight said, "We should stay here and defend the city. It's too hot to march out across the plains. If we stay here, Saladin's armies will have to tire themselves out coming to us. And do you remember how hard it was for us to conquer the city as long as the Saracens stayed inside it?" But another knight disagreed. "We should go out and meet this army," he shouted. "Staying here is cowardice. Let's be courageous and attack Saladin first." King Guy didn't know what to do, but he was afraid that the oldest and strongest knight was out to take the throne of Jerusalem away from him. So he decided to follow the second knight's advice instead. He collected all of his men together and marched out to meet Saladin and his army. That was a terrible mistake. The summer day was the hottest of the year. The sun poured down on the Crusaders. Their heavy steel armor heated up like frying pans on a stove, The rocks were too hot to touch. Dust choked the horses and made the men cough. They grew so weary and thirsty that King Guy ordered them to stop in the middle of the afternoon and set up camp near a well. So the Crusaders unloaded their horses, set up their tents, and hurried to draw water from the well. The well was dry. By now the Crusaders were sick from thirst. And even worse, they were down in a valley between two mountain peaks called the Horns of Hattin. An enemy army could hide behind the trees and rocks above the valley and shoot arrows down on them. But King Guy's army was too exhausted to move. They lay in their tents in the heat, barely able to reach for their weapons. Sure enough, Saladin's army surrounded the valley. The Saracens set fire to the brush and trees around the valley's edge so that the Crusader army couldn't escape. But the Crusaders were so weak that they didn't put up much of a fight. They were defeated, and King Guy surrendered. Now Jerusalem was undefended, so Saladin led his army into the city in a triumphant parade. Saladin told his men not to kill the Christians in Jerusalem. Instead, he took them captive and sold them as slaves. But he allowed the weak and the elderly to go free. And after he declared himself the ruler of Jerusalem, he announced that Jewish and Christian pilgrims would be allowed to enter the city in peace. For 90 years, Jerusalem had been under Christian rule. Now it was in Muslim hands once again. A third crusade was launched to get Jerusalem back, but Saladin could not be defeated. After this, there were 5 more crusades. Each of the crusades tried to take a part of the Islamic empire away from the Muslims, but none of the crusades were very successful. Crusades weren't a very good way to win land back from the Islamic empire.